Good morning. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Buying and Selling a Craft Beverage Business, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. Stay tuned for our next craft beverage webinar, How Craft Producers Can Find Value in Sustainable Practices, taking place on June 12th at 11 a.m. And I'll drop that registration into the chat momentarily. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistance Program Manager, Chris Van Orden.
Thank you, Sheila. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's conversation about buying and selling a craft beverage business. As Sheila said, my name is Chris Van Orden, and I serve as manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance Program at the Virginia SBDC. So today's program will be a free-flowing discussion about the ins and outs of selling or purchasing an existing winery, brewery, cidery, you name it. You can enter any questions that you have in the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer all of them either during or after the webinar. So I'm excited to welcome today's speaker, a return speaker for us, Janine Aquino, Senior Consultant at Aquino Barron Consulting and licensed real estate agent. With a long history in varied TV in the drinks industry, Janine has a lot of insights to share with us today. So welcome, Janine.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Right, there's lots to tackle here, right? We're talking about both the buying and selling here. We could start with the selling side and just say, right, why might a winery or brewery owner, or whoever, want to sell their company? What are you seeing from your side for people's motivations?
Motivations, I'd say one of the most common is, the aging out factor. They've been running it for 20, 30 years, and they're at a point in their life where they want to spend more time with family and grandkids, and, they've built a really good business, good bones. And I would say that is probably the number one reason. And then just some of them may want to just move on to their next life chapter.
Yeah, it's not an industry for the faint of heart. I get it's a lot of lift, especially if you've built something from the ground up and it reaches a new scale that, now you're suddenly employing lots of people, and
Exactly.
it's a lot of hustle. So I get that. For buyers, right? Maybe there's more varied reasons why. I mean, there's obviously the reasons why somebody would want to start a company or want to, right, build a business of their own. Why might someone consider purchasing an extant company, facility, or brand, or whatever it would be, rather than starting from from a blank slate?
So a lot of times when buyers are coming to me, they don't know 100% if they want to start from scratch or if they want to buy an existing entity. So we weigh out cost. How expensive is it to put grapes in the ground, or to buy distillery equipment, or to buy a building, or to get a building built from scratch. So we look at all of those varying costs, and then we look at how long will it take to actually be able to produce a product, as well as get a customer base. So we weigh that against an existing facility that's out there that already has a brand name, has a customer base, has fruit production, has equipment. And inevitably, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, we find that just through that exercise, people realize that just buying an existing entity that they can rebrand, or they
Mhm.
can add to it, makes more sense cost wise. And so that's kind of the exercise we do. Um, and I will tell you 9 times out of 10, they realize, yeah, that makes more sense. And they can do all the marketing and the rebranding and adding an event space to it or whatever it is they want to do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure that people have ideas in their heads of, oh, I want to build it exactly to my own specs and all of those things. And first of all, even if you have that dream of your own, the ability to build something exactly as you picture it, well, is the land available? Is it right? Of course, it's never
Yes.
going to play out exactly the way anyway. But I think it's a good thing for people to wrap their head around of, well, what does it take to build something from scratch in like actual hard expenses, but time to getting the doors open, right? All of the permitting,
Yes.
all of those other things that go into starting a business because everybody's raring to go. And, even
Yeah.
the fast case of starting a brewery, I mean, whatever, 18 months is very fast. And for vineyards, I imagine it's a much longer process since we're talking about agricultural components most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, and then that's a good point with the permitting. I mean, you have, if you're starting from scratch, you have a different set of guidelines that you have to do when you're starting from scratch. Whereas if you're buying an existing entity, there's times where you can actually work under the current license while you're getting your license. And they've already gotten their permitting from TTB, which is the federal permitting, and then the state ABC or whoever the governing body is. Um, and so working under somebody else's license through, and a lot of this work is done through like a compliance company or an attorney, that will actually help a little bit versus waiting and especially with backlog on getting permits. It's always good to be able to get something that's already in place, working under that license until you can get your own license. And like you said, construction costs and availability of all the different materials, and it's fine. And if you want to do that, that's totally fine. It's just gonna, it's just a longer process.
Yeah, yeah, especially now with all the costs for these things going up, right? Just being
Yeah.
being mindful of that, of what things truly cost now. So clearly, lots of reasons why somebody might decide to go the route or at least explore this, right? Kind of go out, shop, and see what might be on the market. So let's say they are exploring a potential, acquisition or whatever kind of like purchase scenario. Um, this might seem like a dumb question, but it's complex, right? When a drinks business goes on sale, whatever the kind of manufacturing side is, what exactly is being sold? Kind of what's the different forms that can this take, right? There's a lot of things that go into a manufacturing or producer business that would kind of be up for sale.
Yeah. So, so the fixed things, but for lack of a better term, of what you purchase are land and buildings. Those are fixed real property type costs. So those are two items. Now we have two different uh types of properties. We have ones that have land and buildings, and then we have brands that just rent out of a
Mhm.
building. So to go back to the real property, it's easy to assess that through looking at comparables, and seeing what land is selling for, seeing what buildings are selling for. And so they're buying those two things, and
Mhm.
then they're buying everything else that's the business. So that could be, and to go back on the land, if there's orchards or if there's some kind of fruit on the farm, that is also a separate value. That's not just like land. That's fruit, orchards, vineyards, hops. That is looked at separately in in addition to the land and the buildings. And so now you're into the business itself. So you're buying the equipment, so all the
Mhm.
production equipment, you're buying all the farm equipment, so mowers, tractors, sprayers, whatever it is. Production equipment, you're buying all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So all of the ancillary pieces that are in a tap room or a tasting room, like a POS system, furniture, um, possibly some decorations, that's on the, that's kind of a small value, but it's still something we value. We're looking at any vehicles, so farm truck, gators, golf carts, anything that is going to convey with the property, so that's a value. The business stream of income, so looking at what the net income off of the profit and loss statements, what that actually is, and assigning a multiple to that value, or to that net income. So, if it's they're making $100,000 a year net income, we assign a multiple to that, and then that's something that a new buyer is buying. And as far as the intellectual property or the goodwill, um, that's always extremely subjective, because if they're going to go through a bank, the bank does not lend on that. So while we understand that it's a great brand and it's known and people know who it is, at the end of the day, unless you have a 100% cash buyer, if they go to the bank for financing, which 90% of them do, um, that's not something that's tangible. So we do value it, but we don't put a very high value on it. And so that's something we have to explain to the seller, that we know you have a good brand, we know you have a great product. However, this is the reality of the bank financing. And then we have the inventory. So you have your, whether it's your spirits inventory or beer inventory or wine inventory. So we have the liquid, whether it's in production or it's bottled or canned. So we do all of that valuation ahead of time of what we think a broker's opinion of value is to sell, what it would cost to actually for a buyer to purchase it. And we present that to a seller, and then it's up to the seller to, decide if that is something they will agree to. But that is what somebody's buying. They're buying literally everything. There are certain situations where some farms or some businesses will sell a piece of the business, and but we find that every single time that we present that, most people want to buy the whole thing. They want to own everything, because they want the ability to put their mark on it, how they want it, how they want to rebrand it. So while we present different options, and we do, at the end of the day, that person is looking for the whole business and property.
So if there's like an estate winery that has a vineyard adjacent to the property, it's unlikely that somebody would be like kind of saying like, oh, I want to be negotiating style. I want to source all of my grapes elsewhere. You could sell the vineyard to somebody else. Usually it would just all convey as it was part of one singular sale.
Yes, except sometimes those other vineyards that are not located on the property are vineyards that are leased. So they're leasing the vineyard. So sometimes those leases will convey. They could be very long-term leases, 30 years, and that will convey also.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's important to when knowing, evaluating that of it's not just a thing that you see here, knowing that, hey, you have 5 other vineyards that are around the county that you need to be tracking as part of that overall.
Yes.
Okay. And some of this would go, there's a question that came up about starting up a cidery, like a tap room, an orchard versus buying one. A lot of this would it's helpful to think of cideries in the same family of vineyards. Partly that's how they're regulated in most ways. But because it's the direct tie, we're talking about, mostly a lot of like agricultural production, we're not talking about buying through a big broker the way you would for spirits or beer where you're buying grain and hops. But we're talking about there's usually an orchard or a vineyard somewhere that's, if not directly implicated in the sale, at least that sourcing is going to be a big part of the equation.
Yeah, so there are regulations on how much fruit you have to grow. And right now, if you're starting a farm winery, cidery or meadery, you have to have 3 acres of something, some kind of fruit. And I believe now you can also have like a pollinator garden is part of that
Mhm.
equation. So you can have blueberry bushes or grapes or a pollinator garden, or there's certain regulations that you do have to have. So if you're purchasing an existing business that has 1.5 acres of some kind of fruit,
Mhm.
and you purchase the entire LLC, the entire business, you can keep your 1.5 acres. But if you are going to get your own license, then you're going to have to add another 1.5 acres. So there is some regulatory pieces to this that you have to understand. Even if you decide to source additional fruit from somewhere or additional honey from somewhere, you still have to have your minimum acreage requirement. As far as brewery, you don't have to have that. That's in its own separate class. You don't have to grow, a certain amount of hops.
Yeah, that's
I
very,
believe
very
I'm
helpful.
not 100% sure on that. There might be some regulation on that, but most of the breweries I deal with don't have like, 3 acres of hops.
Right. Yeah, yeah. For the sort of limited brewery license, it's its own little thing, partly because there are only a couple of breweries in Virginia that have the wherewithal to grow a significant portion, but very
Exactly.
important for wineries and cideries for the sort of distribution rights you have. Most of them are farm wineries because of the ability to self-distribute, and that's right, making sure that you're thinking through the implications of the different license categories that are
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, and that's important. That's something we talk about early on in the discussion of what you're purchasing.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is say, yeah, it's fine to have 1.5 acres. You don't have to do anything more. And then all of a sudden you're selling it. And then they find out later on, oh, we have to add more. So that's more cost. So I try to do a really good consultative approach before anybody's going to buy any type of craft beverage business.
Yeah, that's very, very important to highlight for, people, especially with shifts in some of these regulations, making sure you have a really good handle on it. Um, because if, yeah, you know that you need to put in more acres, that's completely changes your
Hmm.
business model. Um,
Totally.
so clearly there's a lot of decisions to make both on the buyer and seller side. So for a seller that might be preparing for that sale, what are some of the considerations that they want to weigh about how they would structure that kind of opportunity for people?
So there are two ways that I personally sell, and I'm sure there's other people out there that sell craft beverage businesses, but you can either sell it confidentially or you can sell it publicly. And so confidentially means that there might be some generic words out there about this particular property that's for sale, and it's our job to vet the buyers out, making sure that they sign non-disclosures and they have some kind of proof of funds, that they have the ability, the wherewithal to make these purchases. Um, and so people tend to do the sellers tend to do that because they don't want their main brewmaster or winemaker or somebody to find out and have that person leave, or key employees,
Mhm.
or they just want to keep it private for the fact they don't want customers walking through the door asking them, "Oh, I heard it's for sale." That's a much harder way to sell because you're relying on that person's network and how they go after finding buyers.
Mhm.
That will take longer. That's a definitely a longer process. It could take a couple of years at least to sell something like that
Mhm.
in that manner. If you are looking to do it publicly, if a seller is looking to sell something publicly, we have a lot more opportunity that way. It would take a really good conversation with their employees, their main production person, um, and be able to handle, if anybody walks to the door as a customer, that, hey, we're staying in business, we're still here, we're not like closing up shop, we're still selling, we're just at a point in our lives where we want to move on to the next chapter.
Hmm.
So there shouldn't be a bad connotation to either choice. Um, it's just the seller's expectation. And we try to talk about that from the beginning, that it'll take minimum a couple years. If it's before that, great. But if they think it'll sell within 1 year, it can be done, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of effort, and they have to be willing to be okay with the price point.
Hmm.
Because if, we're selling a multi-million dollar facility, um, there's those buyers aren't just lined up at the door. We have to find them.
Yeah.
So it takes some work, and we're willing to help in any way that we can. Some choose to start out private, and then they decide, we're good now. We've talked with everybody. We have a plan, and we're gonna do this publicly.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
that's a big consideration. Another consideration um, is there anything in their business model that they can do to increase sales or make any changes to help their situation? Maybe since COVID, they haven't been able to get the sales back up to the way they want it to be. So you either have a choice of trying to increase those sales, or you lower your purchase price. So there's
Mm.
different ways to handle that. Um, and some of them are just, want to keep it the way it is, and they're not looking to put any more work into it, but they just want to keep it stabilized. And that's okay too.
Mhm. Do you find that sometimes companies will make some investments in, let's say, the property, especially whether it's upgrading of equipment, or right, a tasting room upgrade to make it more appealing to buyers? So like, hey, I'm putting in 50,000 here, knowing that I might get 75,000 in return. It's like when people do all the repairs in their home right before they sell it, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, the ones that do that, that would be fantastic. If they have the wherewithal to have extra, if they have extra money and they can put it into something, sometimes they'll ask, what can we do to make this more appealing?
Mhm.
I mean, the first thing would be if there's repairs, if there's actual like repairs on the buildings, or if there's faulty equipment or faulty vehicles or tractors, anything, production equipment, anything that they can put in, because you're selling a business that's supposed to be running, even if it's
Mhm.
being, stabilized, but everything that you're selling should be not broken. It should be operable, for the most part. You may have some trim on the buildings that's rotted, or you may have little things here and there, and that's okay. But, if your big piece, your tractor is working half the time, we have to disclose that. We
Mhm.
can't just say, here's a tractor and it works. If somebody tells me that something is wrong, I have to disclose it. And so what I do try to say is, maybe if you could fix it ahead of time, then, we can say it works.
Mhm.
But as the more transparent we are, the more the buyers appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's just getting a good picture as a buyer if you're saying, okay, I'm spending this much, and I know that whether it's cosmetic upgrades or the rebrand stuff, I know that there's going to be additional costs on that, at least being going into with eyes open. If it's a
Yeah,
black box and you're not sure, um, that would be pretty tough. I'm sure it's tough if you think that you're all in at $2 million and all of a sudden it creeps to 2.7. You're like, well, my SBA loan was only so big, and right now I have to go
right,
back out to people. That's a lot,
right.
to figure out. Um, there was a question that came up that concerns sort of like business, the sort of like deal structure that is a little bit of off to the side, a different approach entirely, rather than a private sale. But what happens if an owner is interested in going an employee-owned model, like a ESOP, employee stock-owned plan, stock ownership plan? Is that anything that you've seen happen before? Have you ever supported one of those sales, or is that not as common?
I've not seen that. And I can tell you the broker that I have, he has not seen that. No, we have not seen that. We've come across some buyers who may be interested. Let's say let's say this is a business that has real estate, not just, a brand that's renting a building. We've seen some people say, we'll buy the business
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll lease the property for a certain amount of time until we can purchase it. So they buy the business, they run the business, but then they lease the land off the owner. I've done one deal like that.
Hmm.
But most of them want the whole thing. They don't want to, because they want to do improvements. There's things that they want to do with the land and they don't want to have to ask for permission.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've not dealt with the employee owned.
I've seen it only a couple of times in the beer industry. Beer, right? It's less
Yep,
complicated because, right, there's not the land component, all of that. A lot of times it might be a leased building, so the sort of assets are
right.
totally different scale.
Yes,
Um,
I can see that.
Complicated, right? It's setting up the legal structure in the right way. What's the stuff, what's the share for each of them? Is that like a reasonable amount? It is an option. I'd say it's I mean, all of this is complex. It's probably that much more complex, especially when it comes to the sort of like licensing, who's the license holder, all of that. But
Yeah.
if you're interested in that, you can always reach out to the SBDC because there are definitely businesses of all various sorts about that. And if it's just understanding even how it works from like a sort of kind of business and corporation structure, see if
Hmm.
that's interesting to you.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I,
Yeah,
I
you
can
never
see
know.
that even, I can see that with distilleries too, as a
Mhm.
possibility. The ones I've dealt with are usually larger brands wanting to purchase a craft brand,
Mm.
um, where they don't own the building. So I've seen more of that, like acquisition, than I have what you're talking about, but I'm sure it's viable.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of models out there. We're speaking today mostly about the most traditional, the most common thing you'll see, which is the private acquisition,
Yes.
right? We're not necessarily even talking about an M&A of a big company buying, right? These are more private sale type things,
Yes.
which is, I'd say, the most common thing you'd see in Virginia. So, we have another question, but I'm going to save it for for just a moment because I want to talk a little bit more about this deal. So once the seller kind of figures how they want to structure a deal, obviously all this comes down to price, right? Making sure that it's a price that both parties are willing to accept. Can you talk to us a little bit about valuation and the sort of strategy behind it? How you help somebody think through those number decisions?
Yeah. So getting back to what I was saying earlier, we tried to put a broker's opinion of value on a business, whether it's a business that's just a brand without real estate or if it has real estate. So we put this valuation um, onto everything that's tangible that we talked about earlier, or
Hmm.
if there's an intangible component that's harder to value. Um, so we try to put something on there where we're not doing it too much is going into that, because again, the bank is looking at this for the most part, and SBA or whatever, the regular commercial loan, and if they see a large chunk being into non-tangible like goodwill or IP, it's going to hurt the deal. So we
Hmm.
have to stick with tangible. We also have to talk to the sellers, make sure that they understand that they may be valuing it higher in their mind because they think it's worth, X amount.
Hmm.
But we have to be realistic in what the market is bearing.
Hmm.
So we do this valuation, um, and again, it's everything I talked about earlier. And then once that's set, we kind of have like a worksheet that we work from that puts all of this information down. And then when a buyer comes to the table, we share how we valued it. Sometimes there's an appraisal that's been done.
Mhm.
And that can be done just because maybe the business wanted to refinance, or they wanted to do something, or they just want to see what their properties was worth. But that's just typically just the buildings and the real estate. They're not really, a typical appraiser is not looking at the business stream of income. They're not looking at the equipment. Some of them will value the fruit. If it's an
Mhm.
agricultural, they'll value the hops, the beehives, the pollinator gardens, the vineyards, that they will value that separately. But yeah, that's kind of how we do it, is it's kind of a plug and play, we
Mhm.
just look at everything, and then we put a very small piece of small value on the intangible.
Okay. And I think it was helpful, like, the brand, right? Whatever the brand value is, in the end, it all comes down to sales. So I like, emphasizing that if you're looking to sell, the importance of knowing what you net in a year and knowing that there'll be multiples applied. And that's why really doing everything you can to have the trend lines increase, because both the valuation and just saying like, hey, this is a business that's on a good trajectory. There's a storytelling component to it as well,
Yeah.
right? There's like the value of it, but also somebody needs to see like, hey, there's places to grow from here. So I think
Yes.
there's that is very helpful for people that are thinking about it, right? You're not posting it for sale tomorrow, but it's
Yes.
tech companies do this too, right? They do everything they
Yeah.
can to have a really strong growth line before they look for acquisition opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is always a challenge for us, because what we're seeing is, since COVID, um, businesses have been stabilized, but growth is not as common. It's
Hmm.
more, because COVID kind of, almost reset everything. So what a buyer may have in the back of their mind of what they think the business should make is typically completely opposite than what the business is actually doing.
Hmm.
And so then we have to put the value on, are you going to want to start this from scratch? Or here's an existing structure, here's an existing brand, these are existing things that you can just rebrand. And that alone is worth a certain amount of money and time
Hmm.
versus starting your own. So when businesses are basically breaking even or just making a little bit, um, the buyer, we try to talk to the buyer and have them understand that that's not bad,
Hmm.
because there are businesses that are worse, that are not even making any money. So as long as it's stabilized, then they can grow from there. And the price is reflective of that. So if the
Hmm.
owners don't want to put any more time, energy, and effort, and don't want to put a lot of marketing dollars in or a lot of different things to make it grow, then we this is the price of, if you were to do this, you'll get more money. But if you keep it the way it is, this is the price that we would have to put it out to market at.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think, sometimes people, when they're looking at potential acquisition opportunities, they go in there and they say, hey, I'm going to do these things different. I could tell that this company maybe doesn't have a really strong, membership club. I think I can do that. And if they're right, if they're at break even or
Yes.
something better, well, like I know that in year one, I would open these additional revenue streams. And I think that would get me. So, right, you're not just taking things over in a turkey and just going to keep running it per se. You're going to do your own things to it. So, knowing that, hey, as it stands, if this company is uh, not losing money, that's a great baseline to be operating from.
Yeah, 100%. That is the number one question we get from buyers is, first question is, how much are they making? It's
Mhm.
always, we want to see the numbers, we want to see what it's doing. And we don't have a problem sharing that, but we have to kind of also educate them that, you know, this, you're not buying a business that is making X amount. If it's making so much more, the price will be reflective of that. So the price is set because of the valuation of what it's currently doing.
Yeah, yeah. That's the best that you can operate off of, right? These are the hard facts. That's how it
Yeah.
goes. We had a question that somebody raised saying, what is the first step in starting the confidential sale process? If somebody's interested and they want to, okay, I want to do this, what should they start with?
You mean like actually sell it?
Yeah, starting the sale process. Yeah, if
Yeah.
I want to do this, where should they start?
So the first thing is, you know, we want to, first of all, we have to visit the location. You know, we have to see the location. I want to personally sit down and talk with the owner. I want to understand their motivation, you know, what's happening, how their business is. And then we do a evaluation, you know, coming up with, okay, here's a price, and maybe they have a different price in mind, and we come together with a price. And then we do have agreements, you know, like listing agreements, just like a regular real estate sale. And in the listing agreement, it will specify that this is a confidential listing. Um, and then we discuss with them ways and how we do this confidentially. And so then they sign the paperwork as sellers. And then on our end, we start putting together some information that we feel are teasers, I guess the best way to say it, that we can put out there with some very generic photos, whether it's, you know, a brewery or a distillery. You know, we're going to have just like the common equipment or the common landscape that people will identify with. And then we have a list. I mean, I personally have like a list of people that buy certain types of properties, and I then tend to do like a matchmaking. So
Hmm.
I know, for instance, if a buyer is looking for these specific pieces out of a business, maybe they want a home on the property, maybe they don't, maybe they want to have a rental unit on the property, maybe it could be anything. So we figure out what the buyer wants, and then once we have those confidential type listings, we match the two together, and then we start the process of introducing this buyer to this confidential business after they've signed non-disclosures and we know that they have the wherewithal.
Yeah. Okay. That's very practical. You know, this is a process, but kind of it's, important taking things in the right steps, not getting out ahead of yourself, and right, being very eyes open about the valuation of your company and the timelines,
Yeah.
right? This is,
Yes.
nobody gets into this industry, whether you're starting or whatever, because it's an easy way to make millions. It's, there's
Yeah.
other fields if you want to do that. Um, well, we're gonna shift over to the sort of buyer's perspective in just 1 second. I just want to answer two questions that came up. Um, One is somebody had a question about opening an urban cidery tap room. Um, you would not need to have farmed acres. That's only if you want the farm winery license. You can be a production business or a tap room model in an urban center, not on agriculturally zoned land. You would not be able to take advantage of what's called the Virginia Wine Distribution Company, which allows you to self-distribute. You'd have to go through distributors. For wineries, that's a very tough thing to do. Some cideries are built that way if you're sort of a large producer and you want to distribute, or if you want to bring everybody to you in an urban center. That's more common in cider than in wine. So it's definitely an option, but for wineries, the vast majority of wineries producing specifically grape wine are agriculturally zoned farm wineries because that's the way the model works in Virginia. The other question had came up about potentially finding a partner um, to be able to kind of grow this business with a kind of a business on the production side. They have the ability to produce now, but they want to grow that. I'll have them, if you have questions about finding partners or looking for contract production partners, whatever that might be, you can just reach out to me directly. That's a question that we can have a specific call on. Contracting is its own thing, or finding a partner to do some of these things. That's a probably could be a whole webinar in and of itself, but definitely something that people um, do all the time. Just another interesting model that's out there for people.
Yeah, can I say one thing about that
Yes.
though, Chris?
And
Because that um that is a big concern for buyers. So buyers sometimes, when you're selling one of these beverage brands and the owner is like the brewmaster or the winemaker or the cider maker, and they're going to leave, um, the buyers always want to understand how do they find somebody to take that place. So we talk a lot about the contract opportunities that are out there, and there's a lot of them, like you said, Chris. And so I think that's we help them figure that piece out, so that because when they're going to go for bank financing, they actually have to write that in their business plan.
that is a good point. Thank you. And I want to just have a point of clarification for what I said earlier about the self-distribution rights. Non-farm wineries have the ability to distribute through BWDC in specific instances. Talk to regulatory experts. Mary Williams is on the call. She's one of the experts on here. Um, so that is a very useful thing to kind of investigate when you're looking at your business model, what your rights are going to be. There are people who specifically do that. I'm clearly a jack of all trades, and we have specific experts here that you should go to when you're considering these things. Thank you for that, Mary. Okay, so buyers, from the buyer perspective, right? If somebody says, "Hey, maybe I want to approach this now. I want to look at maybe businesses that are for sale before I decide to go all in on building something of my own." If they're considering an acquisition, what are some of the things that they should be looking into? Um, what are some of the metrics that you think they should be looking at when they're doing that math of buying versus building from scratch?
Well, I mean, the first thing that we always ask is what are your top priorities?
Mm,
Do you want acreage? Do you want land where you just want to put, like, I don't know, hiking trails? Or I mean, what is your motive? What is it that you want? So some buyers just, they want the land, they want to be able to grow all different types of flowers, and they want a garden, and they want, their home on the property.
mhm,
Other people may just want to, if they're a producer, somebody who's a hobbyist producer, and now they want to grow it into a brand. Maybe they just want to start out by renting a building, if it's, a brewmaster or cidery. And so it really depends if they're wanting land or they don't want land. And then, what type of craft beverage are they looking to produce?
mhm,
Um, so once we have an idea, a list of these are things that I ultimately want, then we start breaking down, okay, this is, if you want land and you want to build all the things on there, this is what it's generally going to cost you, versus and wait time. Or do you want to buy an existing situation where you may have to make some fixes, some small fixes? Maybe you only have to put in, a certain amount of money to make a few changes. So the upfront cost might be more when it comes to buying an existing uh, brand,
mhm,
but the return is faster because you're able to, start up pretty soon. The other part where they're just buying land or they're just buying a building, there's going to be a certain amount of time. So they have to think about their time and all the costs that go into it. Um, so it's really just it always starts out with what is it that you want. If you had your ideal situation, what would you want? And so we start picking that apart depending on how much money they have to work with.
Yeah, budget is always part of it, right? The
Yeah,
realities of this, and sometimes that's a hard pill for people to swallow. They realize what this costs, but it's better to go, talk
yeah,
to some experts, get a real handle, and whether that's adjusting your expectations, maybe it's not having a major production distribution, like distributing facility with doing all these things. It's starting at a more modest scale,
right.
or going out and raising additional capital. Just, it's always, um,
Yeah,
the fastest way to get $1 million in the drinks industry is starting with two. So
yeah, yeah. Exactly. And some of the privileges that you get with like a farm winery license and cidery is you can put your fruit in the ground. Um, and you can start out sooner because you don't necessarily have to like wait for your fruit to be ready. You can
mm,
sell other people's brands, which is
mhm,
part of the farm winery privilege. You can buy other Virginia wine and you resell it. You can
mhm,
buy European wines and resell them. So it really depends on, we talked about this before, Chris, about do you want it to be estate driven where everything that you grow is what you produce?
mhm.
Or how much does that matter to you? So that's all about time as well. How much time do you want to wait? Do you want to wait, 3 to 4 years because it's all estate driven? Um, that's all part of the initial wish list. We start out with the best scenario and then we break it all down and we change it up until we get to a point of this is exactly what we can afford. This is how we want everything to look.
Yeah.
And do we want to
So,
buy an existing or do we just start out with a building or land and go from there?
yeah. So let's say that you do some of that matchmaking. You have a seller and that had put together an enticing offer. You find a buyer who that's the right fit. They come together. Right. Ideally, it goes smoothly. Everybody agrees on price. You work on transitioning those things. But of course, this is never quite as clean as all that. So what are some of the more common reasons that you've seen out there for a deal to go sideways?
Well, the number one um situation that we come up against is bank financing.
Mm-hmm,
Because it is getting harder right now, just being very honest and open about this. It's harder to find lending for these types of properties. Because the banks want to lend on, real property, the land, the buildings, the other stuff that comes with the business. While it makes the business, it is it's the sketchy part that a
mm-hmm,
bank is not willing to sink their teeth in. So if you have a relationship with a bank, personal or business, sometimes they can actually get a deal done faster
mm-hmm,
than the typical lenders out there that say that we can lend on craft beverage businesses. We can do all those things, yet when a buyer goes to them, they basically want every child that they have. I mean, it gets really intense,
mm-hmm,
and a buyer has to be okay with that. They're going to ask for lots of documents, lots of things, and we help them as much as possible. Like we work with lenders that we know have done deals before and
mm-hmm,
and will work and help you through it. um, it's always good to work with a personal lender versus say, somebody who's based out of California that you may
mm-hmm.
not be able to talk with all the time. So it's about it's about the relationships you currently have with your lending. That is the biggest sideways thing that happens. The deals can still potentially get done. It just
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot more work. Um, that's the number one. That's the
Yeah.
number one situation.
It's a lot of money moving around, and understandably that all that stuff takes time. Everybody is doing their checks. I think your point about speaking to people who have, knowing kind of what's happening in the space about, hey, what maybe some local banks are doing more
Yeah.
deals like this. Just having that intelligence to help you kind of reduce the time to find somebody willing to do these kinds of deals. I'll say the SBDCs are always here. You know, a lot of one of our key metrics is helping people to raise the money for their businesses. So if you're talking about preparing to go after a loan, there are resources for that for sure. One of our colleagues from Loudoun County kind of shared in the Q&A section about that communities are always interested in retaining businesses, attracting new investment. There are economic development organizations that are out there trying to, you know, bring or keep businesses in their area. So Loudoun County has a whole page and programs around agricultural related businesses. So make sure wherever you're looking that that's part of your thinking as well. Especially, you know, these are all ag related businesses. There's a lot of energy put into making sure these businesses are located in different areas. So keep that in your mind as you're investigating opportunities. Maybe that can help them move the needle to get things going if you have that kind of support around you. And you know, every region is different in terms of the sort of services that are provided by these EDOs. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. Oops. Um, so not trying to, you know, say that there's always going to be a problem here, right? If things do go well and you know, a company is able to make a they're able to make a deal happen. What kind of things need to occur at that point, either from a regulatory side, from a messaging side, from the business side? What are some of the things that you encourage these companies to kind of start moving on as these sales take place?
So there's always two types of sales. There's a, you know, LLC sale where they're actually buying the whole LLC,
Mhm.
which transfers the licenses right away because you're buying everything, versus an asset sale where you're buying the assets and you know, you would be applying for your own license, but you have the potential to work under the existing license until you can get your own. And if Mary Beth Williams is on here, she's really good with the compliance part. So you know, I recommend a compliance company to handle those regulatory type things, because that's the most important piece, I think, in terms of how you're going to structure the deal.
Mhm.
So we always recommend certain entities like an attorney, an accountant, and a compliance company, because that's not our wheelhouse. We know just enough to be dangerous, but we don't know everything. Um, so that's part of it in the transition. And then we always ask to find out if the owners or key employees are either, well, first of all, if the owners can help with the transition period. You know, will they be
Mm.
able to stay on for 3 months or 6 months or a year? And then will the key employees stay on? And so once we feel comfortable, we will facilitate meetings with the buyer and the key employees, as long as the owners are okay. And we make sure um, we I believe in as much open communication as possible and not be the conduit for everything, because at the end of the day, if the key employee is not going to stay, it's important that the buyer knows that sooner than later.
Mhm.
And so and it's important to know what time frame the owner is willing to give. And sometimes they may enter into a consulting arrangement with the owner to stay on for a year. Um, And especially if, you know, if the vineyard manager or orchard manager or somebody's going to leave, we have to be able to help fill in that blank. So all of those types of transition pieces have to happen. We ask that the owners put together a vendor list of all the people that they deal with, of all the suppliers that they use, of all the distributors they use, contact names, anything that's going to make the transition easier. Um, you know, when do you turn the utilities off, or when do you put them into somebody else's name? All of those types of things, almost like buying a house, has to be identified. So it's kind of, we treat it like a house, but a little bit more than that. And maybe we have to get a spray schedule from the vineyard manager. We've got to get that in place. We have, if somebody doesn't have any idea of how to run a winery or a cidery or a brewery, we have to maybe get production schedules put together. So those are all things that I personally facilitate to make sure that the buyer is going in with an understanding of what's happening. And it all takes time. These things all take time, but you just have to be patient.
It's a lot to run a business, and whether you're building it from scratch or taking it over, it's right. There's a million moving parts, and just making sure that there are no blind spots is, I don't know, I feel like that's the easiest thing to wind up getting in fights about is, oh, I didn't know this. I assumed this. A lot of trouble. Well, we're nearing the end of our time here, so I could just ask one final question. If you could leave our audience with one takeaway about buying or selling a craft beverage business, what would it be?
Find a real estate agent or somebody who understands the business, because I can tell you it's a lot easier to have somebody help you and walk you through what needs to be done than you doing it blind. It really is extremely helpful to have, whether you're on the buy side or the sell side, you've got somebody that understands it and can do it kind of in baby steps with you, so that by the time you make that purchase or by the time you sell it, you're good. You don't have a whole bunch of other stuff to deal with. So that's just my takeaway.
Yeah, that's great. It's a lot to do, and bring in experts. That's always the sort of common refrain here. So, yes, with that, I'll say, Janine, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I'm going to put your website in the chat now, because we had at least one person ask about getting in touch. So you can always contact Janine directly. But if you have anything that you might need from the SBDC, you can always sign up for counseling for us. Appreciate everybody joining us for today's conversation. Really appreciate all the good questions and comments, especially from some experts that we had on here today. Yeah, join us next month for I believe it's the 12th for the next session. But I'll just say again, thank you, Janine.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all who joined us today. As a reminder, you will receive an email with a link to this recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we do hope to see you on June 12th. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, bye.